They forced the obese girl to sleep in the pig pen. The mountain man built her a palace. The year was 1828, a time when the air in the Wyoming Territory seemed to shift between promise and peril. In the shadow of the high Laramie Range, the town of Willow Creek squatted along a riverbank, a huddled cluster of cabins and shacks whose people were as tough and sometimes as cruel as the land itself. Emily Sanders was 16 when the wheels of fortune first spun her way and cast her into the mud. She was, as the town liked to murmur, big-boned, sturdy, and slow. "Obese girl," they'd hurl with lips curled in disgust as she passed by, eyes cast down. Yet it was not Emily's size that truly drew their barbs, but her gentle silence, her reticence in a world where bravado was the currency of survival. Her mother Maggie, a seamstress gone lean from hunger, had succumbed to fever the year before. Emily remembered her mother's final words, whispered through cracked lips, "Be kind, my darling. The world will try to harden you, but kindness is your strength." Her father, Thomas, had vanished into the endless Rockies, searching for gold, and never returned. Some said he'd struck it rich and abandoned them. Others whispered of bears or blizzards. Emily preferred not to know. In a town where the living watched each other to measure worth, Emily became a convenient scapegoat. No one watched her more closely nor judged more harshly than the mayor's wife, Judith Abel. A woman whose beauty had long faded into bitterness, Judith ruled the social order of Willow Creek with an iron tongue and sharp eyes that missed nothing. It was Judith who hissed, "Let the hogs have her," that spring morning after Emily spilled water near the church steps during Sunday services. The bucket had been too heavy, her arms tired from washing laundry all night for the boarding-house keeper who paid her in scraps. The water splashed across Judith's fine boots imported from St. Louis. She'd remind anyone who'd listen. And so, in a gesture somewhere between cruel entertainment and twisted justice, the townsfolk forced Emily into the vacant pig pen at the edge of town, her only shelter from that day forth. Mayor Abel himself supervised, his face carefully neutral, while his wife smiled with satisfaction. But behind every cruelty, fate sometimes chooses an unexpected avenger. The pig pen was a patchwork of rotting boards and spiked wire, at times slick with mud, and at others drowned in the damp reek of animals. Emily curled on a pallet of straw, gaze fixed on the distant glimmer of mountains beyond Willow Creek's ridge. Evenings meant whispers through the wall from children, taunts from drunken men, the mayor's voice booming over the crowd. Let her learn discipline and humility. Yet the pigs liked Emily. They gathered near, snuffling gently, burrowing under her arms for warmth. She sang to them softly to distract herself as nights grew cold. Old hymns her mother had taught her, and lullabies that once soothed her own childhood fears. The largest sow, whom Emily secretly named Rosie, would rest her massive head on Emily's lap and grunt contentedly. Through those months, Sarah Billings, the baker's daughter, stole bread and milk to the fence when she could. Sarah was 19, engaged to a trapper named William, and possessed a rebellious streak her father constantly worried over. "Don't let them see," Sarah would whisper urgently, pressing Emily's cold hand through the slats. "Father would have my hide if he knew, but I can't. I won't let you starve." But Sarah feared the mayor, too, and visits grew brief and scarce as Judith began watching the baker's shop with increasing suspicion. One evening in late May, as the sun melted behind jagged peaks and painted the sky in shades of copper and gold, A stranger stood at the edge of the pen. He was vast, his buckskin coat layered like gnarled bark, his beard tangled and coarse with threads of silver running through the brown. A rifle leaned against his chest. His eyes, a startling wolf-gray, roamed the pen and settled on Emily. In her isolation, she felt exposed, but not frightened. There was something unmistakable about his posture, not judgment, but consideration. He studied the pen, the pigs, the girl among them, with the patient assessment of someone reading a map. Without speaking, the man bent and heaved aside 3 planks with one motion, muscles bunching beneath his coat. Emily sat upright, straw sticking to her dress, hair tangled around her face. "I saw you," he murmured, voice softer than expected for such a large man, carrying the roughness of wind and wilderness. "From the pass above, the wind carried your song down the valley. That hymn my mother used to sing it." Emily's cheeks burned with embarrassment and something else, recognition, perhaps, of being truly seen for the first time in months. "They made me stay here, with the pigs, because I spilled water on the mayor's wife." He did not react as she expected with laughter or pity, but simply nodded, as if confirming something he'd already suspected about the town and its people. "I'm Joshua," he said simply, extending a hand through the broken boards. "Joshua Byerly. I come down from Fremont Pass each spring to trade furs and repair what winter breaks." She took his hand tentatively. His palm was rough as tree bark, but warm. "Emily Sanders." He squatted beside the pen, the pigs snuffling his boots curiously. Rosie approached, and he scratched behind her ears with surprising gentleness. "The world turns hard sometimes, Emily, but it can be mended. Wood, stone, people all can be mended if someone cares enough to try." Behind him, townsfolk shuffled in the gathering dusk, some bold with curiosity, others wary of the stranger. The mayor approached, flanked by his wife and 2 of his cronies, both carrying clubs. "Stranger," Mayor Abel barked, puffing his chest, "who are you to interfere with town business?" Joshua's eyes never flinched from the mayor's face. "Who am I? Just a pilgrim passing through, but I won't watch cruelty and call it justice." The mayor tried bluster, invoking town ordinances and property rights, but Joshua was already moving. With 3 powerful swings from a hatchet he pulled from his belt. The pig pen's gate collapsed, boards scattering to the mud. Emily blinked, standing unsteadily as the pen's boundaries vanished. The pigs scattered, Rosie staying close to Emily's side. "Take your measure of a man," Joshua said to the mayor, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "by how he treats those with no power to resist or repay him." And then to Emily he spoke softly, "You'll not sleep here again. I give you my word." Joshua did not leave town as the mayor hoped. Instead, he coaxed Emily into walking the edge of Willow Creek, showing her the stars emerging above the mountains, pointing out constellations his mother had taught him as a boy. The town watched nervously, unsure how to respond to this mountain man who spoke softly, but carried the bearing of someone who'd faced down wolves and worse. That night, Joshua vanished into the foothills, but Emily was not alone. Sarah found her shivering behind the general store and smuggled her into the hayloft behind her father's bakery, wrapping her in quilts and bringing hot soup. Joshua returned at dawn, with timber slung over his massive shoulder pine logs he'd felled and stripped himself in the hours before sunrise. No one understood at first what he intended. Willow Creek was a place of structures built for function, not beauty-rough cabins thrown up against the elements. But Joshua started building on a patch of high ground overlooking the creek, land that belonged to no one because it flooded each spring. Except Joshua studied the water patterns, built drainage channels, and laid a stone foundation that would stand firm. By midweek, a skeleton of beams rose against the sky. Children gathered to watch, fascinated by the precision of his work. The men ridiculed him. "That mountain fool thinks he's building a palace," one drunk trapper shouted, but Joshua kept working, dawn to dusk, pausing only to drink water and occasionally instruct Emily on holding board steady. Emily herself could scarcely believe it. "Why?" she asked him one evening as they rested. "Why build anything for me?" Joshua carved a joint with his knife, not looking up. "Because you deserve better. Because everyone deserves dignity. And because I've wandered these mountains for 15 years looking for a reason to stop, and I think I found one." Soon, Sarah and her father quietly helped, bringing nails salvaged from old projects. The blacksmith, a gruff man named Tobias, who'd lost his own daughter to scarlet fever, began appearing with iron hinges and brackets. "Can't have shoddy hardware," he muttered, refusing payment. The mayor's wife tried to rally the town, shrieking that Emily should be sent far from Willow Creek, that Joshua was a troublemaker and probably a criminal. But Judith's power was waning. Instead, more folk found reasons to visit the construction site, bringing materials, advice, and increasingly genuine interest in the girl they tormented. Joshua's skill was legendary among the mountain traders. Stories of his hands, able to mend broken saddles, build cabins that withstood blizzards, and carve furniture that looked like it belonged in Eastern parlors, filtered through the camps and trading posts. Yet his devotion to this obese girl the town had discarded became a legend all its own. By late June, the house was finished, and it was no simple cabin. There was an arched porch looking east toward the sunrise, perfect for morning coffee. A spiral staircase Joshua had shaped from pine rose to a second floor with 3 bedrooms. Windows shone in emerald and gold, pieces of stained glass he'd traded a season's worth of furs to obtain from a traveling merchant. Inside, the firelight from its massive river-stone hearth cast dancing patterns across walls carved with birds and wild flower species Emily had described from her mother's garden, back when times were better. The floors were smooth planked oak, the doors hung perfectly level. Joshua had built cabinets in the kitchen, a pantry lined with shelves, even a small library nook with built-in benches. It was, to Willow Creek, nothing short of a palace. Emily, who had slept curled next to pigs not 3 months before, now stood in the center of her own home and wept. Joshua, finishing the last hinge on the front door, looked over and smiled gently. "Home," he said simply. Joshua moved his own belongings to a small lean-to he built nearby, refusing to presume more than Emily offered. He kept to a cot by his woodpile, though Emily had prepared a room for him upstairs. The mayor, shamed by the transformation and the town's shifting sentiment, approached Emily's new home one evening and bowed his head stiffly before the porch. "Miss Sanders," he said formally, his wife conspicuously absent, "I believe my wife and I acted hastily. I hope you will accept the town's renewed welcome." Emily, standing on her porch in a clean dress Sarah had sewn, looked down at the man who'd supervised her humiliation. She could have refused, could have turned him away. Instead, She nodded slowly. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mayor Abel, even you. Townsfolk came with gifts after that, candles, woven blankets, jars of preserves, wildflowers for her garden. Slowly, they began to ask for Emily's advice on children's ailments, her opinion on settling disputes. They discovered she was remarkably wise when given the chance to speak, possessed of her mother's healing knowledge and her father's mathematical mind. But Joshua kept his respectful distance, never intruding unless Emily asked, though his eyes followed her with increasing warmth. The palace on Willow Creek became an unofficial gathering place as summer deepened. Emily's gentle nature drew people previously afraid to be kind, afraid to stand against the town's casual cruelty. Sarah's father fixed her a loom so she could weave. The blacksmith Tobias built a swing for children in the yard, hanging from the massive oak tree Joshua had deliberately built around. By midsummer, other families began bringing their children to spend afternoons under Emily's care. She taught them reading from her mother's old books, made apple cakes that became legendary, sang them to sleep on the porch swing when their parents worked late. The palace rang with laughter that echoed across the creek. The mayor's wife, Judith, tried to rally opposition, organizing meetings and whisper campaigns, but most townsfolk shrugged her off. The memory of the pen hadn't faded. They were simply choosing differently now. One evening in July, Judith herself approached Emily's porch, trembling and red-faced, stammering apologies that came out choked and painful. Emily, with quiet dignity, invited her inside for tea. They sat in the kitchen Joshua had built, and Emily listened as Judith confessed her own fears of aging, of irrelevance, of her husband's wandering eyes, and her childless state. When Judith finished, Emily simply said, "Cruelty often comes from pain. Thank you for your honesty." They never became friends, but the war ended that evening. Joshua continued working throughout the summer. He brought game from the hills, elk, rabbit, wild turkey, teaching Emily to smoke and preserve meat. He tended horses for families who couldn't afford the farrier, fixed gates blown down in storms, and taught the older boys to set traps far from angry bears and how to read weather and cloud patterns. He built Emily a writing desk carved with wild iris, her favorite flower. He constructed rain barrels and a root cellar. He never asked for payment, though families left what they could: flour, eggs, tobacco, hand-forged nails. Emily caught herself watching Joshua more closely each day, his hands calloused and scarred, but impossibly gentle when carving or cooking, his manner quiet but firm when protecting someone weaker, the way he listened, truly listened, when she spoke about her mother or her dreams of teaching children or her secret desire to learn to read French. In the evenings, when he sat on the porch steps, whittling while she rocked in the chair he'd made, she found words to share her deepest fears of being unworthy, of taking up too much space, of her body being the wrong shape for love. Joshua listened, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished one such confession, he set down his knife and looked up at her directly. "Emily, any man who can't see past your body to your heart is too blind to deserve you. You're the strongest person in this valley, and I've met grizzled trappers who've survived 3 winters alone." Late at night, when stars hung low over Willow Creek and the creek itself sang its ancient song, Emily wrote her thoughts in journals Joshua had crafted from tanned leather and pressed paper. She confided in Sarah during their weaving sessions. "He seems to understand me before I speak. Is that how love feels?" Sarah grinned, her hands never stopping their work. "Maybe you're just easy to love, Em. Maybe you always were, and you're just now meeting someone with eyes to see it. But happiness always draws out shadows, and Willow Creek's peace wouldn't last untested. One evening in late August, a pair of mountain men appeared in town, rough traders known for violence and worse. Amos Pike, drunk from a week's ride and spoiling for entertainment, mocked Joshua loudly in the trading post for his pretty carpentry work, and ridiculed Emily for her size, making crude jokes that sent women hurrying away and men laughing nervously. Joshua, purchasing nails, ignored him at first, but when Pike followed them outside and shoved Emily, calling her names that made even his companion wince, Joshua's patience ended. He didn't strike Pike instead. He caught Emily as she stumbled, steadied her carefully, then turned to Pike with a look that made the drunk man step backward despite himself. "We build here," Joshua said quietly, voice carrying nonetheless. "We don't destroy. We protect what's precious, and we don't tolerate men who prey on women. You have one chance to apologize and ride out, only one." Pike, stupid with drink and pride, reached for his knife. Joshua moved faster than seemed possible for a large man. His hand clamped Pike's wrist, twisted, and the knife fell to the dust. Pike yelped. "I said once," Joshua repeated, releasing him. By morning, Pike and his companion were gone, last seen riding hard toward the northern pass. The town buzzed with the confrontation, but Joshua brushed it off when men tried to buy him drinks. Instead, he returned to Emily's porch, apologizing for the violence, however brief. Emily only smiled, touching his arm gently. "You protected me, but more than that, you taught me not to be afraid. There's a difference." Rumors began circulating after that of Joshua's past, his years wandering through broken mining towns, always seeking a place to build rather than break. Some said he'd been a soldier, others a convict redeemed. Emily asked him once directly, and he answered honestly. "I was angry once, young, stupid, angry at God and the world. Got into bad business in the Colorado camps, claimed jumping, fights, nearly killed a man over pride. Spent 2 years working myself to exhaustion to pay back what I'd stolen, and another 5 learning that rage only burns the man carrying it. So now I build. It's how I repay the universe for giving me another chance." Emily's respect deepened into something more profound. She wrote him a letter that night, slipped it under his lean-to door, thanking him for giving her dignity, teaching her strength, and simply showing her what goodness looked like in human form. Joshua responded the next morning by leaving a single white rose on her breakfast table. A glacier rose from the high valleys, blooming impossibly late, that must have taken half the night to retrieve. In early September, as the aspens began turning gold on the mountainsides, Joshua asked Emily to walk with him to the lake beyond the pines. It was a place he loved, he explained, a perfect circle of water and wind where the mountains reflected themselves so clearly you couldn't tell earth from sky. Emily, nervous but eager, accepted. Sarah helped her into a riding skirt and braided her hair. "He's going to ask you something," Sarah predicted, with barely contained excitement. "I can feel it." They rode Joshua's steady mare together, Emily seated in front, while Joshua kept her secure with one arm. The trail climbed through stands of lodgepole pine and across meadows still brilliant with late wildflowers. Emily had never been so high the air tasted different, cleaner, touched with snow from peaks still distant. The lake appeared suddenly as they crested a rise, a sapphire gem cradled by granite cliffs, so still it mirrored every cloud and tree. Emily gasped. They sat on a fallen log smoothed by time, sharing bread and dried meat Joshua had packed. For a long while they simply watched the light change on the water, content in silence. Then they spoke of loss her family, the gradual erosion of her childhood security, his own story, a mother who'd taught him patience and carving before dying of consumption, a father who'd drunk himself to death afterward, leaving young Joshua to wander at 14. "I've been alone most of my life," Joshua said quietly, watching an eagle circle overhead. "Taught myself to prefer it. Safer that way. Can't lose what you don't have." He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. "But you've changed that, Emily. You've made me want to stay, want to build not just a house but a life, want to wake up and have coffee on a porch with someone who sees the same beauty in the world that I do." He slid from the log, kneeling not in proposal but in homage, taking both her hands in his. "Emily Sanders, you have brought me home. Will you share this place, not just the house, but everything with me? In sun and in snow, in plenty and in want?" Emily's heart thundered so loudly she feared he'd hear it. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I want to be with you always, Joshua. But you must know, must truly understand, I am not what the world calls beautiful. I may never change. People will talk." Joshua smiled, lifted her hands to his lips, and kissed each palm. "You are extraordinary. You are kind and wise and brave. You are beautiful in every way that matters, and anyone who can't see that can go straight to hell with my compliments." She laughed through her tears. "Then yes, yes, I will share my life with you." They married in late September, in Emily's garden behind the palace, with the whole town attending, even Judith Abel, who cried quietly in the back row. Sarah stood up with Emily, Tobias the blacksmith with Joshua. The traveling circuit preacher pronounced them wed, as the aspens showered them with golden leaves. By autumn, the palace housed two hearts bound together by adversity and joined in hope. Willow Creek celebrated them with a festival music, dancing, roasted elk, pies, and cakes from every household. Even Mayor Abel danced with his wife, both of them seeming lighter somehow, younger. Winter arrived harsh that year, snow tumbling from high passes and burying the valley under white silence. But Emily and Joshua's palace was warm, thanks to Joshua's careful design, a broad fireplace with heat channels built into the walls, thick insulation, double-paned windows that caught sun during brief, clear days. Townsfolk gathered regularly for meals, drawn not just by warmth, but by community. Old feuds softened as people talked and listened, shared stories and songs. Emily taught women to read by firelight. Joshua carved toys for children and helped men repair equipment for spring. One December afternoon, a mare belonging to the mayor struggled with a difficult birth in the stable. Emily, hearing the commotion, braved the snow to help, recalling lessons from her mother about birthing animals. She worked for hours, patient and calm, until the mare delivered not one but two healthy foals twins, rare and precious. The mayor, watching his prize mare survive what might have killed her, found his eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Emily," he whispered hoarsely, squeezing her mittened hand. "I was wrong about you, profoundly, shamefully wrong." Joshua, watching from the stable door with pride shimmering in his gaze, remembered why he'd fallen in love with this woman. That night, He gave Emily a carved locket inside, a willow leaf for strength, and a tiny scrap of blue cloth from his mother's coat, one of his few possessions from childhood. "I want our family to carry my mother's memory," he said quietly. "She would have loved you." Sarah confided to Emily during their next weaving session, "You changed this town, Em. Not just with your kindness, though, that helped, but you showed everyone by surviving, by thriving, that the way we'd been treating people was wrong. You and Joshua, you built something that shamed us all into being better. That's real power." By spring of 1829, Emily and Joshua had become pillars of Willow Creek. The palace hosted children for lessons every morning, women for sewing circles in the afternoon, travelers needing shelter in the evening. Emily's calm authority settled disputes. Joshua's strength protected the vulnerable. They wandered the hills together when work allowed, planting wildflowers along trails, mapping the changing seasons, setting aside sacred spaces where neither would hunt. Their love grew quietly, no ostentatious displays, only small acts of daily care. Joshua rubbing Emily's sore feet after teaching days, Emily mending his shirts with embroidered patches showing his favorite mountain peaks. One April morning, Emily woke to illness, nausea, dizziness, profound exhaustion. Fear clutched her heart. Was it the fever that had taken her mother? Joshua rode hard for the doctor in the next valley, refusing to rest until the man agreed to return with him. The town rallied. Women brought broths and teas. Sarah stayed day and night, cooling Emily's forehead with river water. Joshua never left her side except when forced, tending to her through 3 days of fever with patience that made Sarah cry. Emily recovered, but the doctor pulled Joshua aside afterward. "Your wife's not sick," he said gruffly. "She's with child." Joshua staggered as if struck, then laughed a pure, joyous sound that brought people running. Emily, still weak but smiling, reached for his hand when he burst into her room. "A child," she whispered. "Truly?" "Truly," he breathed, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her hands. But joy was followed by complications. Emily's pregnancy proved difficult. Her size, the doctor warned, might cause problems. She was confined to bed for weeks at a time. Joshua converted the downstairs library into a bedroom so she wouldn't have to climb stairs, hired Sarah to help with daily care, and took over the teaching himself, reading to children with surprising gentleness. Through summer and into fall, Emily's belly grew. The town fretted, prayed, brought gifts for the baby. Judith Abel knitted a blanket that took 3 months to complete her finest work, she admitted to Emily, because she was trying to knit away years of cruelty. In November, as the first snow fell, Emily's pains began. The birth was long and brutal, lasting nearly 2 days. Joshua paced grooves into the porch, praying to gods he'd thought he'd abandoned. Sarah held Emily's hand while the doctor worked. Tobias, the blacksmith, stood guard outside, turning away anyone who might disturb the household. And finally, as dawn broke on the 3rd day, a baby's cry pierced the silence. A girl, tiny, perfect, with Joshua's gray eyes and Emily's gentle expression. They named her Margaret, after Joshua's mother, and Rose, after the pig who'd kept Emily company in her darkest hours. Emily recovered slowly, but the baby thrived. Margaret Rose Byerly became Willow Creek's collective daughter, passed between families, sung to sleep by Sarah, carved toys by Tobias, blessed by the preacher, even cooed at by Judith Abel. Margaret's first years passed in a blur of wonder and exhaustion. Emily and Joshua's home remained a refuge now echoing with a child's laughter, sometimes chaos, always love. By 1831, Willow Creek had grown substantially. New families arrived monthly, drawn by stories of the palace on the hill and the town that had learned to choose kindness. Emily greeted each with warmth, teaching children who could not walk to read, showing injured trappers there was hope beyond pain, welcoming women fleeing bad situations. Judith Abel, transformed by her own reckoning, now spent long hours by Emily's fire, knitting socks for the needy and telling younger women about the shame that came from cruelty. "I was small inside," she told one group, "so I tried to make others smaller. Emily showed me a different way." Joshua's skill kept the town growing when fire broke out in the boarding house. He organized bucket brigades and rebuilt 3 structures in a month. When the bridge washed out, he designed a stronger replacement with Emily's help and the labor of half the town working together. At night, they curled together by the fire, Margaret asleep in Joshua's arms, reading Emily's journals aloud. She documented everything: the pen, the palace, the wedding, the birth, creating a record for their daughter of how love could triumph over cruelty when given the chance. They talked sometimes of adopting more children. The West was full of orphans, mining accidents, disease, abandoned by families who couldn't feed them. But they decided to wait, to give Margaret her early years, to build their strength for the challenges more children would bring. Years passed like water in the creek, constant, changing, essential. Margaret grew into a bright child who inherited her father's building skills and her mother's wisdom. The palace grew crowded in the best way. Emily and Joshua eventually adopted 2 orphan siblings from a neighboring mining camp, twins named Jacob and Grace, who'd lost their parents to cholera. Willow Creek prospered beyond anyone's expectations. The town became known throughout the territory for fairness, for welcoming strangers, for settling disputes without violence. Emily's song, the old hymns she'd sung to pigs years before, traveled through the hills. Traders told stories of the woman who slept among pigs and now ruled a palace built by a mountain man's love. Joshua's beard grew white, but his hands remained steady. He taught his children and half the town's boys to build, to carve, to see the beauty hidden in raw wood. Emily's eyes shone brighter with each year. Her laughter became the heart of the town, her home the center around which everything else revolved. The children grew and eventually left to make their own ways, Margaret to marry a young doctor who settled in Willow Creek specifically to be near her, Jacob to become a surveyor mapping the expanding territory, Grace to teach in a school for freed slaves in Kansas. But all returned to the hill regularly for advice, comfort, celebration. Sunday dinners at the palace often included 15 to 20 people, children, grandchildren, friends, strangers, becoming family. As decades stretched and the hills remained constant, Emily would sit on her porch in the evenings, Joshua beside her in matching rocking chairs he'd built for their 10th anniversary, and watch willow branches sway in the wind. She thanked every stone of the house, every board Joshua had planed smooth, every pig that had once kept her company and taught her that dignity isn't given by the world but claimed by the soul. Her days were filled with work, joy, and love, but never humiliation. Each sunrise over the palace proved that dignity and kindness, when paired with courage, could silence cruelty and build a home greater than any dreamed before. Joshua would reach over and take her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 30 years together. "No regrets, Em?" "Not a single one," she'd answer. "You built me a palace, Joshua Byerly, but more than that, you built me a life." In the 1860s, when travelers rode up Willow Creek's winding path, children pointed to the palace now expanded with wings for grandchildren, gardens sprawling across the hillside, and told stories. They spoke of a girl forced to sleep with pigs, of a mountain man who avenged her and built a home on a hill, of love that transformed a town and made saints of sinners. They spoke of Emily's wisdom, Joshua's strength, and the family they'd built from fragments and faith. Emily and Joshua grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren made not just from blood, but from every kindness, returned and multiplied. When Joshua finally passed in 1869, Emily held his hand and sang the hymn he'd first heard from the pass above the one his mother had taught him, the one that had led him to a girl among pigs. Emily followed him 3 years later, dying peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by Margaret and all her children, her journals completed, her legacy secure. And long after their days ended, the palace remained expanded, maintained, eventually becoming a school and then a historical site, a whisper in the western wind, reminding all who passed that dignity belongs to every person, that kindness makes palaces where none stood before, and that love, when it builds, creates foundations that outlast stone